Good evening and welcome to Too Deep, a football podcast. With us, as always, although moving around the grid, Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com, coming to you from our upper right square, our favorite celebrity. That's a dated reference, right? If you go Hollywood Squares. Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, PFF.com, coming to us from the palatial studios of One Pro Football Focus, as he is there. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. You can see catch my work at 810WHB.com, gentlemen. How are you? I hope everybody had a good Memorial Day weekend, right? I trust well rested. If Eager is still at the office at this time, not so well rested right now, are you?
I'm not, but it's been good. I mean, we have some cool things happening at PFF, and so we're sort of moving things along here on this June before everybody skips town for the summer.
Yeah, no kidding. All the vacations going. We got a lot we want to get to today, a lot of different stories that we're going to talk about. Let's start, though, with the overrated, underrated, Jeff Chadiha's column today on NFL.com, highlighting some of the overrateds and underrateds. Let's start. We've got a list of different players and their situations. Let's start with Lamar Jackson. Jeff, did he go into him and his contract discussion? Does that go into your overrated or underrated category?
Overrated with a bullet. Just, I understand that he's not at OTAs. I understand this has been 2 years in the making, that his agent is his mom. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on here. But end of the day, Lamar Jackson is the Baltimore Ravens. Not just their offense, he's their whole team. I mean, he pretty much carried that team that was injury riddled for most of the second half of last year. It almost got them into the playoffs before he got beat up himself. Had to miss some games late. The Ravens want to make this happen. Lamar Jackson wants to make this happen. The question is, what is he ultimately worth given his playing style? And that will be figured out at some point. And I know that there's a big number out there with Deshaun Watson getting fully guaranteed $230 million that certainly affects this negotiation. But end of the day, he's going to be the Ravens quarterback. He's going to be highly paid. And all this talk about what's happening right now isn't going to matter that much.
I'll buy that if you think it's a no-brainer, that the deal gets done no matter what, and this is just a formality and it's simply a matter of time. Because I can see a scenario where, again, not from information, but where if I were calling the shots, where I wouldn't do a deal, I wouldn't get it done. And so if feet are being dragged, or I'd at least be considering not getting it done, if feet are being dragged, I'd consider not happening. I mean, is there any way that this does end up being, I don't know, a prelude to war and it ends up being a bigger deal than you think?
I don't see it that way. I just don't think Lamar Jackson is built that way. And I feel like the Ravens know what they have with him. And they've gone out of their way to make sure that they appreciate him every which way they can. They changed their entire offense for the man when he was still an unproven commodity. And so I just feel like, it's all negotiations get ugly at some point. But you cannot let him go, because if you're the Baltimore Ravens, you're starting over from square one. You have an entire roster on offense, especially built around his talents. I just don't know where you go if you get to a place where you don't have him being your quarterback.
Eric, how about it? Does Jeff have it right? This is an overrated thing, the fact that his contract remains, out there and with no agent and seemingly no progress?
Yeah, I think so. I think the issue with him is just not having an agent, as we found out with Orlando Brown in Kansas City. Like that probably needs to be resolved for everything to make sense. But I agree with Jeff. I don't think this is a situation where they're going to get a big trade market for him, or he's they're not going to get better than him right now. This sort of ship has sailed. I think the best move for them is to get something done, and I do think it will get done.
That's where I like, if there's no trade market for him, like, to me, I guess the question is, should you be giving him a contract? And does this open the door for the Baltimore Ravens to find it out, to not invest $200 million in a guy, which, Jeff, you pointed out in your column, gets hit more, runs more, right? It is a unique offense, but it exposes him more. So, like, I would tend to agree right now. I assume by everyone I've talked to in Baltimore that this deal is going to get done, right? That it's a matter of time. But man, if you wanted out, he's giving you a way out, isn't he?
I look at it. Look, I think the number in of itself, the $230 million that Deshaun Watson's getting, I just saw a chuckle out of this guy's comment because I thought the same thing about Eric being in the craft brewery. Aaron hit it on the head there with that one. But the $230 million that Deshaun Watson got does make this more intriguing because there is a question about what do you pay a guy. Now, we've seen contracts being done for 3 years. I think that's a fair amount of years for what Lamar Jackson could potentially end up having to face from injuries or whatever. So why would there be? I don't think you have to get to a point where you have to franchise him to make it work. I don't think you have to get to a point where you're paying him as much as Deshaun Watson to make it work. But the numbers are so big for quarterbacks now who haven't done what he's done. I mean, Deshaun Watson hasn't won an MVP. Deshaun Watson hasn't taken a team to the heights that Lamar Jackson has taken the Ravens. Lamar Jackson has won more games in this league than Deshaun Watson. And so I do get it from that standpoint. But again, like Eric said, when you have an agent, you have a lot more perspective on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the place you can go. All right, let's go to another name, Orlando Brown. We mentioned it. Eric Eager talked about the fact that Orlando Brown has finally named an agent. What is of note, and I apologize, I don't have the man's name here, but he has never negotiated an NFL contract. That was the thing that jumped at me. It's one of the reasons I certainly didn't recognize the name Tom Condon or Drew Rosenhaus, because it's a guy who's never negotiated a contract. And furthermore, the release, the press release to announce that he has an agent went on to say that they bonded over a commonality of battling diabetes, and that he felt the fact that this gentleman has no relationship with any NFL GMs is a positive.
Which, by the way, when have you ever seen a press release by a player hiring an agent to negotiate his contract?
I haven't. Which to me almost made, yeah, I mean, which is why I'm going to guess this is on the. I'm not guessing. I've read your piece. It's on the underrated list. I mean,
yeah, but I'll let Eric start with it. He's such a big Orlando Brown fan. Yeah. I think he should be the one to kick this one off. This is his guy.
Yeah, I think. I mean, honestly, this is just something where he's reeling a little bit. You have to believe that he thought it was be trivial. You know, I'm a world-class left tackle. I'm going to get paid when I'm going to get paid. The Chiefs needed me. I came in and provided a service that was essential to the process. I think that's, and then, that none of those things actually being true. I think Orlando Brown, that when people are desperate, that's sort of how they end up acting, right?
Yes. I would agree, but I don't get a sense. Do you think he's desperate, Jeff, or do you think he's tone deaf to what?
I think he's tone deaf. Yeah. I think he's operating in a world in which, and this goes back to when he came here. And I'm a big Orlando Brown. I like Orlando Brown a lot. I think he's a really bright guy. He's a great interview. Yeah. He's worked really hard to get to where he's got with his career. But when he came here, and when I talked about this back when it happened, people kind of poo-pooed it, but he was coming here to make money. He wanted to play left tackle because that's where you got paid to make money. And why it's underrated is because you're seeing it. It's already probably cost the Chiefs the opportunity to go after some other players in free agency. If they overpay him, it's going to cost them more opportunities to go after players down the road. And I don't know. Is he going to be the Frank Clark of the offensive line? Is he going to be the player who gets worse and worse and worse as every year passes? That's a real possibility for him. If you're paying a guy like that top left tackle money, top offensive lineman money, that's a huge mistake.
Let me ask you this, Eric. If Orlando Brown was holding out, would that be a big story?
It would be, because I don't think the average person, Jeff is attuned to what the Chiefs are doing. I think the average person in the NFL, media doesn't really know what the Chiefs have in terms of options with Kennard, with Wiley, with Tooney, guys like that can easily sort of patch it up. I think people would very much overreact to an Orlando Brown holdout.
I don't know that they'd overreact as much as if there's no left tackle or you're taking a guard and moving Joe Tooney out to play left tackle because Orlando Brown is not going to be ready to go. That, to me, for the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the third favorite now. They've been the first favorite for several years now, but now I think it was when we talked last, the third favorite in the NFL, I think that would be very much of note. That's why I think Jeff's got this right, that this is definitely underrated from the standpoint that no Orlando Brown and moving a guard out to tackle, I think would be big news. I think it'd be one of the things we would be talking about. And I think when we get down to it, if there is we get down to the final couple of days, if they don't get a deal done with Orlando Brown sooner. Again, there's also the point that they gave up a first-round pick and have just 1 year out of that first-round pick.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be a pretty big story. So I agree. I think it's on the underrated side. I think part of the reason it's underrated is because there is an assumption that it will work out, right? But if it doesn't, it becomes a big deal. It becomes a really
but from Orlando Brown's perspective, is he actually valued in the league the way that he thinks he is? Like, if he held out, how many teams would be barking up the tree to trade for him? I mean, he's not like Laramie Tunsil, right? He's not Dwayne Brown. He's not, he's closer to, like, this is offensive, but he's closer to Cam Robinson than he is like Dwayne Brown, isn't he?
Yeah, and your mic cut out just a little bit there, Eric. At least it did on my end. Maybe it was me. I apologize if it was. But no, I like, but those, I don't know. How's he viewed? He's viewed as younger, right? Like how much does youth, even though he's maybe more suited for the right side, but how many guys, I said it today, like a mediocre tightroper can still walk across a tightrope. Okay. That's kind of the way left tackles work. There's like, if you're just pretty good at left tackle, you're still a left tackle, right? Like that. And Eric, you were the one that talked about, right tackles are getting $20 million. I think what may blow this up is if we get into, and may prove why it's underrated right now, is if we start finding out that the demands are for him to be, because I saw somebody float the idea of him asking for $25 million. And I know contracts always go up, but to pay Orlando Brown more than Trent Williams, especially when it's this franchise that was in the bidding with the 49ers for Trent Williams, and they kind of called off the dogs and went to Joe Thuney last offseason. That's how they kind of spent their money. And you find out that you got a guy that's not nearly as highly rated on the PFF grades, and you end up paying him more and give up a first-round pick for Trent Williams. That becomes a monster story, and how not to manage the cap and your resources.
And he's also the first guy in the Brett Veach era to be in a position where he wants to be the highest, or we're claiming this. We don't know for sure if he said this, right. Who probably wants to be the highest paid position. And the last two guys who wanted that are gone. Tyrann Mathieu is gone. Tyreek Hill is gone. And so this gets to the question of the culture you're creating and the people on the roster now how much do they care about being a part of this team? How much do they care about their money? And that's a whole different dynamic. You're trying to build a championship team. Patrick Mahomes showed up. All these guys had been through disappointing playoff losses. Alex Smith, their quarterback, they were hungry. They wanted to make names for themselves. And now you have guys who are showing up who have different interests. And not that they're bad, but it creates a different dynamic in the locker room.
I knew this name, Deebo Samuel, was going to go on the overrated, because you have said many times on this podcast, Jeff, that you're not buying that there's really any leverage here for anybody. Eric, do you think that this is Deebo Samuel and where he's at with the 49ers right now is an overrated story, and that this is all going to calmly go into training camp in the season with no problems?
I don't think it's going to go into the training camp with no problems. I think he could end up being a player who ends up like holding in, not really expressing pleasure at the whole thing, but I don't think he gets moved. That 49ers offense is significantly worse without Samuel. And I think they know that. I think he knows that. And I think, they're probably just going to come to a resolution where he's not going to play running back the same way that he played that in the second half of the season and in the playoffs. And they'll probably go about their business, properly. I mean, Shanahan used a day 2 pick on a running back again. So they're very clearly trying to like make that position a thing. Last year they went with Samuel because Elijah Mitchell was hurt and he didn't trust Trey Sermon, and Raheem Mostert was hurt. So I think that's most of it is going to be Deebo Samuel's no longer going to play running back, and things are going to resolve themselves quickly.
I don't know. I mean, how much does have when you can put a fullback on the field, um, and then look like you're going 4 wide or 3 wide with a tight end, and then be able to line up in a power run game? Like, how do you sub out against the 49ers when you're not sure if Deebo Samuel might be a running back, right? Because I do think that creates some mismatch problems. Again, I'm probably fishing here because
almost sounds like you're giving credit to Kyle Shanahan for being an offensive genius, a mastermind of a coach.
I have always quoted friends of mine who have said that Kyle Shanahan is boy wonder when it comes to creating offense and play calls. I love him as an offensive coordinator. I don't think he's a horrible head coach either. I just have said he is overrated as a head coach. But I will tell you that he earned points with me this year by running Deebo Samuel. Like, I think that's the future. I mean, everybody wants to get somebody out of where they can create a mismatch and attack it. And I think Deebo Samuel's ability to line up in the backfield and maybe show a heavy run set for the 49ers with a fullback in front of him and then go, or no, we're going 3 wide with a tight end and it's a passing offense. I think that creates problems. And I think just I won't say it's underrated. But I think I think Eric's probably right. I think that sounds like what they want to do is get away from running him.
Well, they
not so much.
Not so much they. I think him. Like, I think he sees what real wide receivers are being paid. He produces like a real wide receiver when they use one, but he also sees how the shelf life of running backs is not very high, and he doesn't necessarily want to be the next guy whose value is diminished because of the position. Because of the wear and tear he's taking in on his body.
And I totally get that. But to me, that does, I think, change the dynamics of their offense. And I think if you lose that ability, and by the way, my knock has been that there have been 2 playoff seasons under Kyle Shanahan with the 49ers. That's why I've said he's overrated. Not that he sucks, but that he's overrated. But I think that changes the dynamics of the 49er offense. And I think, unless Trey Lance, which, we can butt that up because that's one of the things we had on there and put him in here. Yeah. Unless Trey Lance is going to be a guy that can really sling it, one of the ways they made up for by having just a game manager in Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback was these different wrinkles, these different nuances to their offense. And if they lose that and Trey Lance isn't a difference maker, then I think that backs up the bus, which I think if they don't come to play, if they don't have a playoff season again this year, particularly if it's a 7-10 type of year, I think there'll be some loud chirping around the Bay Area. Like, nobody sees it now, but I think, and I don't think he'd be fired. He'd get another year, but I think people would start to talk about it.
Isn't that John Lynch, though? The fact that team doesn't have any depth, the fact that team doesn't have a good quarterback, and they can't really convince Shanahan to get a good quarterback. The fact that D Ford, the Niners paid D Ford like $1 million per pressure and paid a 2nd-round pick for it too. Like, is that Shanahan? Or is that Lynch?
It's ultimately Kyle Shanahan, right? He's the personnel guy. So, but John Lynch. Did I say Shanahan? That's John Lynch because he's the personnel guy. But I don't think any head coach and personnel guy work in exclusivity. Right, where one doesn't have a big impact on what the other one's doing, or certainly at least the coach has a big impact. What he wants influences what the general manager does. But I think it's a fair point. Rob Gronkowski and whether or not he comes back, overrated, underrated, Jeff?
Underrated. I think it is a huge factor in whatever Tom Brady wants to do. And if this is his final season, I'm assuming that he may think about playing beyond this year, but that offense is different when Rob Gronkowski's in it. And it's different because Tom Brady trusts him to make big plays. Now, I know Mike Evans and Chris Godwin's coming off that ACL, and they've added Russell Gage and some other pieces to it. But ultimately, Gronk is his security blanket. And he was huge in the playoffs a couple of years ago when they won that championship. He actually played pretty well last year. Sort of lost in the fact that he was out for 5 games with injuries. He does get banged up a lot. He's a big guy. He's taking a lot of hits, but he caught 50-some balls for 800-some yards. I just feel like if they want to be a player here, he's got to be a part of this. And I think he will be a part of it.
Gronk for you, Eric?
I mean, he matters for sure. You look at that offense, PFF forecast this week, we really did, a tier of, offensive supporting casts, from a skill position standpoint. And we looked at and said the Buccaneers were something like a tier 3 because, Godwin's hurt. Evans is a little bit older, no Antonio Brown and no Gronk. Right now, if it's Cameron Brate at the tight end position, like as the starter, then it's going to be weaker for them. So, yeah, I think it matters. The hard part is the NFC is going to be very forgiving to teams that have elite quarterbacks like Green Bay, like Tampa Bay. And so I don't know if it matters all that much until it comes down to playing a team like the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, where Gronk was huge a couple of years ago and will be huge again if he plays again.
The one thing that I will say that the only reason it's not underrated, because I agree, I think people are forgetting about Godwin's injury and no Antonio Brown. Like, they're down weapons, right? But the only reason would be is if it's a foregone conclusion that all he's doing is skipping OTAs and minicamp, right? And maybe even part of training camp. If everybody in Tampa knows he's going to be back, then that would be the only reason. Otherwise, I agree. Like, they're down a lot of firepower. And at some freaking point, Tom Brady has to get old, doesn't he?
Yep.
And if he's got a guy that can really go win jump balls and he's not there, he loses that. I think it does begin to be a problem for him. That for sure. So I don't know. It's just a matter of like, where's your money? He does or doesn't play, Jeff?
He plays. That's his boy. Brady's his guy. I'm sure that was part of Brady's consideration coming out of retirement. I think Brady even said that on that golf thing whatever they were doing. Yeah, the match. Yeah, I caught like 5 minutes of just seeing Patrick Mahomes' wife and kid on the court. So that's all I could remember from that watching that match. But yeah, I mean, Brady's his guy. I'm sure Brady talked to him before he came back and said, "I'm coming." So you come when you need to be there, but be there.
Jeff, I don't know if you know this, but Vegas is all about family now.
Is it?
That's what everybody's doing. They're taking the wife and kids. They're going to Vegas. It's all about family.
Yeah.
It's a little shift they're trying yet again in Las Vegas. All right, how about Baker Mayfield and the fact that he's still a Cleveland Brown? At some point, it seems like this has to play out. Is this overrated or underrated in your mind, Eric? It made the overrated list for Jeff. Where do you put it?
Yeah, I'm firmly on the overrated thing. Mayfield kind of strikes me as like a Kerry Collins type, a Mitch Trubisky type, where I can see him having a good season at some point. Later on, I can see him leading a team one year, like Trubisky this year, like Collins did after he left Panthers, went to the Saints for a small amount of time, then went to the Giants. I don't see it being immediate. I don't see it being something that matters right away. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it mattering right away for Baker Mayfield this particular season.
Why is it overrated, Jeff?
Because he's not going to make a difference this year, wherever he goes. I mean, I think he's a solid quarterback who's probably going to end up on a not very good team. And so why do we care that much about that? I mean, ultimately, like Eric said, he's going to have to go the long route to get back to a place where he can actually be a difference maker on a team. I see it more like his role model should be Ryan Tannehill. Go someplace where you can be a backup on a well-coached team that's got a strong run game like you just had in Cleveland, and find your way back, prove you can stay quiet and stay focused. You'll have your chip on your shoulder, and if somebody goes down and gets hurt, you'll get your opportunity. And you make the most of it. I mean, when he was healthy a couple of years ago and that team was riding high, he was playing good football. But ultimately, as someone in that organization told me a couple of years ago, like, he's the kind of player you just need 30% of him being at his best to win games. Don't need like Patrick Mahomes to be at the 80-90% number, or Aaron Rodgers or something like that. And so once he figures that out and goes someplace, and I think it's probably going to end up being Seattle in the end. I don't think Carolina, after drafting Matt Corral, is going to want to invest in another quarterback to see where it goes there. I think that his best option is probably Seattle. I don't see a place like New Orleans taking a look at him. And if he goes to Seattle, buy into the run game, listen to Pete Carroll, and wait for your next shot.
I do. I think you're right. I think it's overrated because I think we know what the conclusion is, right? The Browns release him, correct?
Yeah.
But I think what lights a fire is the Browns are not exactly the organization that makes all the right moves, do they? So what if they decide, you know what? 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson. Let's keep him around. That's an explosive situation, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's just, Baker Mayfield hitting the talk show, tour, talking about how he's not going to go in there. I mean, that just creates more fire and animosity around a Cleveland team that needs to bounce back. I think that's what would change it, is if they don't release him, right? I assume they're going to walk it right up to training camp and then let him go. Or I don't know, will they have him sitting out, still trying, and then release him right before the season?
Well, what did they do with Odell? Did they do something with Odell where they said you can't come in here, but we're not going to fine you for not being here? Wasn't that the agreement they struck?
Yep.
Right, because otherwise it's like a $50,000 fine a day, isn't it? So like that's prohibitive for a guy like Mayfield, who has certainly made a lot of money, but is not in the area. Is not like making top end quarterback money quite yet.
Sean says Baker Mayfield QB1 for your Edmonton Elks.
Nice.
Follows previous Heisman Trophy winners up to the CFL, of which Eric will, of course, have some action.
Is that what the Eskimos are now called? The Elks?
They're now the
Elks.
Eric would know that because he knows every team and every sport.
Yeah. The Edmonton. There are called the Elks now. They have basically the same uniforms, but they changed the Eskimo to an elk.
But they wanted the EE in their logo, kind of like Indians became Guardians, the IANS.
Yeah, okay.
They just put a couple letters in front of it. All right, Odell Beckham Jr.'s future. Jeff, you've got this listed as underrated. The fact that he's out right now. If he comes back, Adrian Peterson style, he'll be back during this season. Adrian Peterson basically made it back in 9 months and rushed for 2,000 yards when he did come back. Why is this one make your underrated list?
He's still a difference maker. And I know an ACL tear when you're 30, I think he's 30 now, is a different deal than when you're 21, 22 years old, like Jameson Williams. But ultimately, if you watched him in the playoffs, you watched him at the end of the regular season for the Rams, you saw him in the Super Bowl before he got hurt. That was the Odell we've been hearing about and expecting to see for the last, whatever it's been, 4 years since he started going on this run of just all kinds of craziness and social media stuff and injuries. And so if he goes someplace and he seems to be okay with being a number 2 guy now, and he can go someplace with a good quarterback, I certainly expect him to be a difference maker in the second half of the season. And I certainly expect a team like Green Bay to be carefully watching what's happening with him. If he doesn't go back to the Rams, I think they will be looking at him as a real option for their offense, because they were looking at him last year when he came available. So I think he can help a team in the playoffs, and I think he will be, even with that ACL tear, a difference maker again.
Rams, Packers, Chiefs, like right now it's kind of like, oh, we'll see where he lands. But if he would land on any one of those Super Bowl contenders, Packers being the one that most needs a wide receiver, if he lands there, that changes the betting landscape. That becomes a Titanic story, right? If he just takes the biggest payday on a team that's not that good, okay, but if he lands even on like a 1-year prove-it deal to prove that the knee's healthy on one of those contenders, that becomes a giant story, doesn't it, Eric?
I think so, but I almost feel like you guys remember when, Andre Rison, right, came onto the Green Bay Packers in '96 and kind of was that guy for a team that needed him, joined late. I mean, very similar to how he joined the Rams. Like, I wonder if there's an aspect of Odell that, because Green Bay, like, the hay is in the barn for the Packers. They're up against it money wise. They got Romeo Doubs, they got Christian Watson, they got Sammy Watkins, they got Randall Cobb, and like all those names sound horrible, but it's what they're going into the season with. The Chiefs are going in with Sky Moore, they're going in with MVS and Juju and Mecole Hardman, and like I see for the contenders, like they might wait till like week 8 or 9 to get him. And so if you're Odell, do you wait that long, or do you join I know Rison was with the Jaguars weirdly before he was with the Packers in '96. So like it's not the same, but it is kind of like one of those where he could be somebody who comes in and actually like fits at the very end.
By the way, Ron Mexico, the alias Andre Rison, went by when he was, detained and said, "No, I'm not Andre Rison. My name's Ron."
Was he from Mexico?
I thought it was.
I never knew that.
Vick.
I know
it was Michael Vick.
Was Mike
That's
Vick
what I
Ron
thought.
Mexico? Then what was
Because NFL.com.
Yeah, we just got confirmation.
Yeah.
Justy.
Okay.
NFL.com would not let you buy a Falcons number 7 Mexico jersey. Like that was one of the, like they would like refuse to like be one with the bit there.
Somebody, by the way, if you're listening to us via the podcast, we stream live Thursdays at 9 p.m. And, of course, you can be part of the chat room if you're on Facebook, Twitch, or, of course, YouTube. And somebody in there, remind me what Andre Rison, he got in River Falls, Wisconsin, where the Chiefs used to train. They had something that happened up there, and the police were around, and they were asking questions. Or maybe it was after curfew or something. Brock Middlebrook. I thought of it on my own. Brock Middlebrook. That's the name that Andre Rison gave. That no. Okay. I'm Brock Middlebrook.
My sister went to UW River Falls. I'm pretty sure they both have gotten arrested in that town.
Chefs Rockwell.
Yeah.
Brock Landers and Chefs Rockwell.
How dare you? Yeah, Sean coming in. I don't know how long the delay is on Sean, but I had the Brock Middlebrook. I got it there.
I knew Sean would know that. Let's be honest here.
Yes, absolutely. I credit him. I'll give him credit, but I did have it before it came up in the chat room. I'm not sure how long ago he put it in there. But yeah, no, I think Odell Beckham Jr. has the potential to be a really big story, right? A really big story, just as he was, as Eric said last time. Let's move on to the new Rooney Rule. This is something we talked about during the course of the year, and it kind of, the fact that when we would talk about Eric Bieniemy not getting a head coaching job, I pointed out, that I don't remember the numbers. I think there were 24 offensive head coaches after the last hiring cycle, and like 20 of them or something. I'd have to go back and look through my notes. Either played or coached the quarterback position, and the fact that the Rooney Rule will now include the quarterback position, Jeff, this is something that's, long overdue, in my opinion, but better late than never. And I think this is going to be a much bigger deal than people think. You want to talk about our underrateds. This is one of our topics after the underrateds, but I think this is underrated when it comes to a story. It's not getting the run it deserves, but I absolutely think it's a really big deal in the NFL.
It is. I'm kind of curious how they will apply it, because generally the coaches have the ability to decide who gets to be in that position. So that does create a weird dynamic with, ownership, whoever else pushing to have this happen. So we'll see. But you're right. There's no question that the guys who are the hot candidates, the guys who get the most run, the most juice, are guys who either coach quarterbacks or play the position. I think a bigger issue with minority hiring, and I've said it many times before, is that you have to find ways to get minority candidates more access to owners. You have to find ways to create more opportunities for the interaction. The league just had a deal at the last owners meetings where they had a number of minority candidates, coaches, and front office people go down there. And I'm told it was a pretty positive experience, where they actually were able to have some candid conversations with people, sit and talk over a drink or whatever. I think that goes a long way towards remedying the problem. I was talking to Doug Whaley, who was the Pittsburgh Steelers OGM. He's now heavily involved with the XFL. And he was talking about how that league is trying to do a lot of things, prepare coaches and to be quarterback coaches, to be offensive coaches, minorities, and also to be in the front office positions. And he talked about when he got his first job because he met Russ Brandon, the Bills president, when he was taking some seminar at Stanford or some program at Stanford. And they were there together in a management class doing a workshop. And when it came time to hire a GM, Brandon remembered him. And that's how you get jobs, not just in the NFL, but in life, really, at those kind of jobs. You don't get them based off your body of work. Unfortunately, we don't like to believe that. Usually it's more about who you know, who trusts you. And that's kind of that. No matter what rules you put in place, that's always going to trump everything else.
But there's
not a million people applying for every head coach job, and then there's not like the sifting through of candidates the way like a corporation would go through it. You're right. I mean, and it's who like you put in certain positions, right? It's who you put in, like for general managers. It was a big deal for Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah to get the strategy role with the Browns. And then he just hired, I can't remember the guy's name, Washington, I believe is his name.
Yeah.
Hired the
Demetrius
guy,
Washington. Yeah.
exactly, from the 49ers to be in that same role with the Vikings. So then again, there's that pipeline, there's the who you know, and there's, and again, like as you said, the people, they promote people who look like them, right? So we you need to, you make it more comfortable, for people who, are not, who are underrepresented to empower more people who look like them, right? So that we can, move this thing forward. But it starts with being intentional about who's in certain positions.
I think it's really underrated from the standpoint that NFL head coaches are now accountable, right? Like, because they're the ones. Almost every NFL head coach has it in his contract that they have final say about their coaching staff. So this now puts them. It's not just owners, right? Oh, it's easy to be a coach and have your all-white coaching staff, or whatever you want. One person of color on your staff, but now it's on you. You have to bring these people in. You have to look at them, and you have to look a guy in the eye and who's more qualified and say, no, I'm going to go with this guy over here because he's my buddy. And to your point about getting to know people, you have to interview. I mean, head coaches will get to know qualified candidates that can be quarterback coaches. I agree
with you. I think that's a huge thing in terms of it helps get people into positions where they are more marketable and more visible. I think NFL coaches by nature are just suspicious and distrustful. And so they tend to hire based on that too. They hire people who they can control. They don't hire people who they want to. Andy does it, but a lot of people don't do that. And
right.
So I have friends who coach college football who have a hard time finding gigs in that world because they're not part of whoever coaches, buddy patrol is who they've got on staff. And those guys keep those jobs forever. And then when you try and break into a pro job, like, unfortunately, a lot more minorities are in a position where they can take a quality control job where you're getting paid hardly no money and hang out, that's part of it too.
That's the sinister part, right? Is that, like, if your last name's Del Rio or your last name's Belichick, you can live in dad's basement, make $18,000 a year and cut up games. And then 10 years later, everybody's going to say, well, of course, this person's more qualified. Well, yeah, they got the chance, they could work for dirt poor wages early on in life and become, like, no one's, I think, arguing that Steve Belichick is unqualified for his job. We're saying did everybody else get the apprenticeship that he got? No. That's to me the sinister part, right? And we don't check on it. I mean, there are also, like, what I really like in the league. You had somebody, Meredith Manley from the Cardinals. She just got a promotion to go work for the Niners. It's with women and underrepresented groups in analytics. Like, we're seeing a lot of that now. But it starts at the bottom. It starts making the pipeline conducive to folks who wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity.
Let's talk a little bit about Eric Bieniemy versus LeSean McCoy, or maybe LeSean McCoy versus Eric Bieniemy be a better way to put it. Eric Bieniemy has been one of the prime candidates, really has been the tip of the spear about African-American coaches that haven't been hired. We've had rumblings of, well, here are things that Eric Bieniemy, doesn't do, or he didn't interview well here, or he didn't do this. This is the first time we've had somebody put their name next to it that, hey, this guy has, flaws in his coaching game. LeSean McCoy, very briefly at the end of a podcast saying, I'll tell you why he doesn't have a head coaching job. Doesn't have anything to do with the fact that he's black. It's that he treats players differently. Some players one way, some another way. I won't take it. Other people will. Now, LeSean McCoy was a player on the downslope of his career, had fumbling problems, but was not an unproductive player for the Kansas City Chiefs before he basically got benched. 4.4 yards per carry, rushed for, I think it was over 600 yards for the Kansas City Chiefs en route to them winning a championship. Jeff, is this a big?
He also killed the first Matt Moore game by running through the line of scrimmage against the Packers with the ball being held like a loaf of bread. And that is why he got benched, because the guy absolutely refused to be a team player and hold the ball like he was a scrub, which at the end of his career he was. Okay,
and agreed. And we don't know. Is that what it comes down to, Eric Bieniemy? Listen, I was screaming, yelling, like, how can LeSean McCoy be palming the ball out there? I mean, it was
running on it. But I remember. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
I remember living in Minnesota growing up as a kid, and Eric Bieniemy, because Adrian Peterson in his 2007 was his rookie year, 2009 was the year that they almost won the Super Bowl, and I remember distinctly there being an interview where Eric Bieniemy said, "Your fumbling is going to cause the Vikings not to win a Super Bowl," and he was right. Like he was like that NFC Championship game against the Saints. If he hangs onto the football, one of the 3 times he fumbles, they probably win the game. And like Shady McCoy like fumbled away a game that they could have won against the Packers at home with Matt Moore the quarterback, and he did so by being a hothead and acting like he's the NFL's leading rusher, which was 2012 called they want their running back like that. I'm sure Bieniemy is a tough coach, but LeSean McCoy doesn't. I don't think he's the voice. I think here.
I think you're missing the point. I mean, yes, I was stating, and I agree with everything you said. There is reason to bench him. There is reason to not play him. Valid reasons, right? But this is the first person. Like, I don't think it can just be swept under the rug. Eric Bieniemy has been labeled as a guy ready to be a head coach for 3 years and hasn't gotten a job. Right. But nobody, and this is something that I've talked about before, like, I think you should have to be, public about here's why we didn't hire this guy. Yeah. And if not, you at least need to be forward with the individual, right? Whatever team didn't hire Eric Bieniemy or any other coach, really, no matter what coach you are, you should have to tell them this is why you didn't get the job, right? You should have to, a 1-page, here's, for God's sake, everybody, you can't go to any website without having to be asked to fill out a survey. Could owners just have to fill out a 1-page thing on why you didn't get it? I would love to see it made public, because then other coaches, not just that coach that interviewed, if it's like, hey, listen, Eric, one of the reasons we didn't hire you is because there's a list of players who called us and said, you're an a-hole. And, we need guys to play hard for you, and we're not sure that'll happen. Okay, he gets a chance to digest that and maybe change the way he coaches. But also then every other coach out there could be like, okay, this is what didn't work for him. Let me do things a little bit different way. So, I mean, listen, LeSean McCoy was an ass. This is not a referendum on LeSean McCoy or whether or not he should have been sat down. But the point is, I don't think you can just throw out the criticism because LeSean McCoy was fumbling the football. Like, we have somebody who at least said, now, if your point is, Eric, that there's no basis to this whatsoever, and he's just using this to, take a shot at, he knows Bieniemy hasn't gotten a coaching job and people rally to his cause, and you're saying that this is just a cheap shot, and he's using this as ammunition, and this should not be paid attention to, I'd listen to it, but I'll at least say this: he hasn't gotten a job, and somebody finally said, well, here's a reason why. Yeah, no, I agree that there are probably reasons, like again, he coached Adrian Peterson hard. He's also, and again, I don't want to make comparisons. We just talked about the Rooney Rule for quarterback coaches. We also look, and there was the clip with the USFL with Kirby Wilson, who's another running backs coach, basically cutting a guy because he wanted a chicken salad instead of a Cobb salad or whatever the hell. Like, running backs coaches they coach that way, right? Like, that field, like that, it just appears to be like that is a schematic thing where I would imagine that most running backs coaches coach like Eric Bieniemy does, in a hard, tough way. That's a position that requires toughness. That's a position that requires, athleticism, speed, all that kind of stuff. That the coaching is different. We talked about this before, than being the quarterback coach. Is it that? Is it just that? Is it like every other head coach Shady McCoy has been more of the, not nurturing is the wrong word, but less of the way that Eric Bieniemy is, and he's giving Eric Bieniemy a trait that isn't necessarily unique to him, but unique to the position he coaches.
Somebody just raised the point here. It was Daniel Rushing asking. I keep hearing. We don't have the sound here, but the way I heard the quote was that he talks to players a certain kind of way. Not that he talks to players one way and other players a different way. Are you guys hearing it differently?
Well, McCoy said he treats guys. He said both. He treats guys differently, or one way, and other guys another. I think is how he said it. He treats some guys one way and other guys another. And I'm a player that's not going to take it. is how I remember the cut.
Yes, I thought he said he talks to players a certain kind of way, and I'm not going to take it. But maybe that's either way. He wasn't around long enough to be able to have a credible opinion about the situation. I do think he had an axe to grind. The part that bugs me about all this stuff is that 2 years ago, there were a lot of black players who were very upset about policemen shooting black people in the streets. And it bugs me that you can't get more black players who want to come forward and talk about this stuff in a positive way. Personally, I think as a black guy, black players should be behind black coaches getting jobs. And what Shady McCoy did was black on black crime to me. First of all, he didn't really say anything. He just made some general statement about Eric Bieniemy, didn't provide any details about it, didn't give the guy any credit for what he's accomplished in this league. And Le'Veon Bell did the same thing, by the way, with Andy Reid, when he left town, which was to say, throughout some ambiguous criticism, and then it got left alone. But because Eric Bieniemy is in a situation where he is trying to land a job and spent the last 4 years trying to get a job, it becomes a bigger deal. Ultimately, I think Travis Kelce said it best, that this guy has done a lot of good things. I've knocked head with him, but I know where he stands. And I think at the end of the day, that's what matters to players the most, is that you're authentic. I don't think anybody could ever claim that. I've never heard anybody. I've known Eric Bieniemy for 30 years. I've never heard anybody say he's not authentic.
Eric Bieniemy met with the media today, by the way, was asked about the symposium, said he thought it was great, said it was great to get to network, what you guys were talking about, and getting to basically meet a lot of people that are going to be difference makers. He also said, I thought was a great line, what does he have to do to be a head coach? He was asked, he said, I just got to go get it done. I mean, it's on me. Pretty much saying I've got to keep, winning and having success and make myself a candidate that can't be denied. And so I thought Eric Bieniemy had one of his best days on a microphone. By the way, the first time that he's been seen or heard from since the week of the AFC Championship game. No. Just think about that. So all these things are going on in the NFL, and the guy who's been the tip of the spear, I think I'm right. I don't think he's been at a mic. This is the first time that he's been at a mic since it was the week of the Chiefs-Bengals AFC Championship game, which to me is an issue.
It's part of the problem.
Yeah, of course it is.
Well, and I think it's just one of those things where, I mean, again, I think that there are opportunities that are he's being blown over because of associations that folks are making that are different than him particularly. I think coaching somebody hard is to me, like in my experience playing, is a trait of a running backs coach. And instead of trying to examine if that's the reason that LeSean McCoy was saying biased stuff about him, I'm just disappointed by what he said.
There's a lot of guys in this league who coach hard, from Bill Belichick to Tom Coughlin to Bill Parcells, who've had tremendous success doing it. I don't think that all of a sudden coaching hard has become a negative trait. I just think that, and to be honest with you, I think a lot of these owners don't know any of these guys before they start looking for head coaches. You telling me that there was some big book on Kevin O'Connell out there?
Or they don't know anybody though. Like I'll tell you guys this. Like it's June 2nd. This week last year, I was in a meeting selling a product to the Kansas City Chiefs, and Ryan Poles was across from me in a Zoom, and I had no idea who he was. Yeah, I had just met him, and now he's the general manager of the Bears, and he's like, he's wonderful, like whatever, like. But and that was after a year in which Brant Tillis and Borgonzi and guys like that were the like, these guys don't know anybody. And
who heard of Brett Veach 5 years ago?
Exactly. And so and to say the hard part about Bieniemy is that his name is like every single year we're like, oh, he'll get a head coaching job. I remember meeting him at the Combine in 2020 and, being like, hey, when you get a head coaching job next year, email me, let me know, I'll get you all set up with all of our tools and everything. And like, it was just a foregone conclusion, but then every single year there's a hot head coaching candidate and he loses his luster for some reason. And it's again, because these processes, the production function that produces coaches is not efficient. And when I was a professor, the production function that produced professors, my best colleague was a guy that we offered his job to 4 people and they all turned us down. And he ended up being amazing. Like these things are not efficient. This market is not efficient.
And I think part of it's because Eric Bieniemy is one of a handful of coordinators, particularly offensive coordinators, that makes him stick out. Brian Daboll has been a coordinator for a lot longer, and he just finally got his shot, and has had to bounce around to more teams than what Eric Bieniemy's been at. But it's
but not to cut you off. But part of the problem is that even some black coaches won't give those opportunities to black men to be coordinators. So Brian Flores was fired a lawsuit. Mike Tomlin's fired a lawsuit. Look at the guys who've been their offensive coordinators. No black people involved in those.
But they also have to win. And if the system won't let them come through what I think is the pipeline, quarterback coach to get there, like how many of those head coaches, how many of the offensive coordinators they had were former quarterback coaches, right? If that's the lifeline, if that's the only path to get to being a head coach, then I would feel bad telling Mike Tomlin he's got to go hire a wide receiver coach, or you're obligated because you're black and you've got to hire that black coach. Because
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they won't go look down the pipeline and say, who can I find here who could benefit from this opportunity. Hugh Jackson got the job at Graham and he hired Art Briles to be his offensive coordinator.
But I think that there's
you find a worse guy.
I think the problem. I think there's an issue with
parole boards to find guys.
Yeah,
I think it's probably exhausting to make it that high, and I think, and that is why when you look at folks like Bruce Arians, when you look at folks like Mike Tomlin, when you look at people who have really made an effort to. I think I'm a WNBA fan. Bill Laimbeer, right? Like stepping aside and letting Becky Hammon coach that team because she never got an NBA job, et cetera, et cetera. It takes, I think that we should be appreciative of the people who do throw the ladder down. And because I think the impetus for everybody is to I've made it here and I had to fight through. And they think about this, and I don't mean to bring up politics, but when people are oh, we're going to forgive $10,000 of student loan debt. And the people who are opposed to it well, I paid mine off, and no one thinks of the point of becoming a head coach and having that platform is to help other people, right? Is to make sure that somebody else has a path that wasn't afforded to you in as easy of a measure, right? And so I think that that's the hard thing is it is so hard for the first, African-American coaches to even get to that high. So and so, for there might be a natural thing to just be guard what you have because no one helped you along the way type of thing, and I think that that's a really thing that we have to guard against. And we also have to point out when a guy like Mike Tomlin takes a Brian Flores and says, I'm going to protect you over here, because I really do think it takes an element of bravery.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's finish with a fun one. The match. First of all, am I the only one that watched the match last night? Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers versus Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen on a golf course in Vegas.
Yeah, I saw 2 holes while I was eating dinner, and that's about it. That was enough to make me not want to watch any more of it.
It's really sad, but I couldn't find a place to bet on it, so I didn't watch it.
Yeah, you couldn't get a bet on a golf match in Las Vegas?
No, I bet on the one when it was Manning and I can't remember. It was Manning and Mickelson, and then Brady and Woods. I think was it during the pandemic. And I think I don't know. Remember which side I bet, but I lost.
They had odds because I lost $50.
Yeah, I couldn't find I was looking at all my little shady illegal sports books, and I couldn't find one. A line for it, so I didn't watch. I heard Pat asserted himself well, though.
He did. He played well. He had some big shots. He did miss one putt. It was a tough putt. Had he made it, they'd have been tied at the end. But he was carrying Josh Allen the entire time. The golf. I mean, it took forever because of how many balls are out of bounds, and they're gonna move all the spectators. Let's move
That's
it.
What I saw.
Take a drop and move it at club length. I mean,
they get the laser line off the shots because they were all fading out of the screen when they were.
Yes. I mean, you saw the difference between, football players and professional golfers. But I will say this, they compete, and there is a level of touch. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, it was fun to kind of see the competitive nature of it, and to see Patrick Mahomes dig in. Like, he hit the longest drive. It's apex. Like, do you ever watch golf? Have you ever seen what, like, they now will tell you the apex of like how high they got the ball, and so you kind of get a feel for how is it a pitch and they're dropping it in, or on a big drive. I don't know what it is. It's well over 100 feet in the air that a big drive on a professional golfer would go. Patrick Mahomes won the long drive, and the ball didn't get higher than 46 feet in the air. I mean, he just kind of wills the ball down the course. Like, he's not an adept, player. He doesn't do things, but he just muscles the ball on the drives, wills it there for the touch game. He's not a bad golfer. I mean, it was kind of interesting to watch their golf games.
And so they're playing for charity, right?
Yeah.
Is that what it was for?
He won $350,000 for a charity by winning the long drive. Everybody else, by the way, and he was accurate enough to keep it on the course. Everybody else was off the course. He won the closest to the pin. And maybe it was 100. One of them was 100,000. He was 7 feet away from the pin on it closest to the pin. Like, he picked up a lot of money for charity. And it was
charity.
I think they had one. I don't know if it was Feed America. That label was on a lot of the cards. They also, was the first time I saw the Patrick Mahomes logo. Like, he's got his own TB12. He's got his PM. It looks like someone starting to draw a basketball goal and they didn't finish it. That's how I would describe it there.
Like Hangman.
Kind of, it's weird. I don't know. It doesn't work for me, but neither does Russell Wilson's R3W thing, whatever he's got going.
We had to, at some point, we're going to spend a full hour on Russell Wilson.
Okay.
Because the guy's a complicated fella, I think.
Is he going to have success, or is his complicatedness going to keep him from having success in Denver?
I think it's going to be a little weird. I think it's a little corny at this point. But LeBron's also corny, and he's a billionaire now. So
Yes. I will say this. The last thing I'll say about the match is, at the end, they had the quarterback conversation. They had the four of them sitting there and Ernie Johnson interviewing him. And seeing, two of the best at their craft as youngsters that are on their way up. And Mahomes has got a championship and 2 conference championships, so he's fairly accomplished. But Josh Allen's obviously a very talented quarterback. And to see him there talking with Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, 2 veterans that have accomplished so much in the game. But then even to see the dynamic of Aaron Rodgers with Tom Brady, because they're supposed to be kind of peers, and it was very obvious the dynamic that was the 4 of them sitting there, that even though Aaron Rodgers has numbers that are approaching Tom Brady's and may eventually surpass Tom Brady's, probably not because he spent 3 years on the bench, but are going to be up there around Tom Bradyville. There, to me, was an obvious difference between Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Like, there was it wasn't like there was disrespect for Aaron Rodgers, but Tom Brady was like an oracle in the room, even amongst 3 guys. With Aaron Rodgers has accomplished a lot, and then the 2 younger guys. It was, I thought, quite interesting. If you find it on YouTube, to go watch, just put in the quarterback conversation, because they did it at the end.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I saw that part on TV. Okay. Yeah, there's only one Yoda,
right?
So only one guy can be Yoda.
Okay,
everybody else has got other Jedis out there, but only one Yoda.
Yeah, am I the only one that's fascinated by how those types of people interact?
Yeah, I think the guy's won 7 freaking Super Bowls. Like, it's absurd,
everybody who came in the league with him is now doing something else.
Yeah,
whole generations.
Yeah, I mean, listen, not to bring up a terrible tragedy, but Marion Barber, passed away. He's 5 years younger than Tom Brady. I mean, that's like, it's so sad. He's not the only one. Tom Brady's still playing football. Like, it's amazing, right? Yeah. I don't know. I geek out when I see.
I was watching the Patriots Giants Super Bowl when they were trying to go undefeated. Brady wasn't a Super Bowl.
33.
He was 30.
30.
He won his third Super Bowl when he was 28 years old. and then went 10 years without winning another one.
And has 7 now.
And that's 7 now.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one is we all love Patrick Mahomes. We all think he's amazing. Brady has won more Super Bowls in the Patrick Mahomes era than Mahomes has.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's unbelievable.
It is. It is. It is unbelievable. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Too Deep podcast. Very soon we'll be back to every week. Right now we're every other Thursday here on the Too Deep podcast. So until then, for Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, my name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. Hit us up with the likes, the loves. Don't cost you nothing, but it does us a lot of good. We would appreciate it if you would. Thanks for listening here on Too Deep.